This is figure 2.1 dealing with gross domestic product. And the formal definition is the total dollar value of all final goods and services produced in an economy in a year. So let me go into that. When you say total dollar value, if we were in Japan, it'd be the total yen value. If we were in Mexico, it'd be the total peso value. Of all final goods and services. We're only interested in what we're producing this year. If I buy your used car, that was produced, in some prior year, so I don't want to count that this time. I'm only dealing with final goods, not intermediate goods. When I buy the new Ford car, it already has the price of the tires built into it. But what GDP really is, it's a measurement of productive activity. It's how much stuff an economy has produced from one year to another, and so it's useful for comparing inside an economy from one year to another, and it's also useful for comparing from one country to another country. As you can see here, we have about a $14 trillion economy. The Chinese, the second biggest economy, around $8 trillion, and Japanese around $4.5 trillion. So this tells you that you and I as Americans live a very lucky lifestyle. I want to pause and go to table 2.3. All right, this is table 2.3, and it's dealing with GDP per capita. And to get that, we would take the numerator would be GDP, and our denominator would be population. So it's GDP divided by population. And you can see that the per capita for the United States is around 46,000, and for the Chinese, who have the second biggest economy, but look at their per capita GDP, only around 6,000. So by a factor of 8, we're better off than they are. And it's useful to compare the first world to the third world with this per capita business, because if you're in the developed economies, the European economies, Japan, the United States, the economy, the GDP, the numerator is growing at, let's say, 2 or 3%. And our populations in the developed world are barely growing at all, so let's just say 1%. And so what we can see is that the per capita GDP is getting bigger. The slice of the pie is bigger for us. Contrast that with the third world. It's reversed. Their economies, the numerator is barely growing at all, maybe 1%, and their denominators, the population, is growing at 3 or 4%. And it makes sense. It's rational from their standpoint. It's not an irrational decision. Remember who you're dealing with here. These are largely illiterate folks. They don't read or write their mother tongue. There's no Social Security program in their economy. There's little health care. If you have 6 kids, 2 of them are going to die, so you've at least got 4 kids to help you in old age. The kids can help you on the farm. It doesn't cost much to have a kid. You just go in your house, and then the next day you're out in the field. And in a lot of societies, it's a macho ethic. If you have a big family, it makes the man feel bigger. So for a lot of reasons, it's hard to restrain that population. Some folks talk about economic growth being the best contraceptive. And what they mean by that is that when the mums and the dads around the world, when they see economic growth taking place around them, they start to ask the question if the family unit would be better off if they had one fewer child. And so they start having that dialogue, and it makes sense because now they can see what's happening out there in the economy and the world. I want to pause now. I want to go to figure 2.2. So this is figure 2.2, and you'll be hearing this equation for the next 10 or 15 weeks. GDP, the gross domestic product, is equal to consumption C plus investment I plus government G plus X of N, which is the net exports. And so you can see by far there that consumption is 71% of the shooting match, so it means that you and I are living well. The I category there, investment, primarily stands for either new real estate or new capital goods. And you can see that it's a small component, only 11%, and it's very volatile. And in a few weeks when we talk about Keynesian economics, you'll see that he put quite a bit of emphasis on this component as being a primary mover of the economy. The figure there in the red and the orange, the government, is about 20%, and that's a good way to compare when people use the term socialist versus capitalist economy. A nice way of presenting it is a pie chart as government as what percentage of the overall pie chart, and you see for the United States it's around 20%. If we were in France, it'd be about half. In other words, about half of what's produced over there are by government employees. And so that'd be one way to characterize the difference between a socialist and a capitalist economy. I want to pause a second and go to figure 2.4 dealing with the mix of output. This is figure 2.4, and it shows a dramatic shift. In the last 100 years, we have become a service economy. So if you want your pet being washed, if you want your carburetor fixed, if you want your hip replaced, if you want your tax return done, if you want a manicure, you can see that it's gone from around 20% to around 50%. So it means we're a rich economy because we have these services. If you were in a third world economy, a very poor economy, you wouldn't have nearly this amount of services, and the farming sector would be much bigger. Look what's happened to us in the last 100 years. It's went from 37% down to 2%. And part of the reason it's able to do that is because it's so productive. You know, we have 25-foot tall air-conditioned John Deere tractors, GPS monitored, that can apply fertilizer where it wants to, etc., etc. So what we've seen in these charts is that we've defined GDP. We've talked about the important difference between GDP and per capita GDP. We've talked about the formula, C plus I plus G plus X of N business, and now we've seen in the last 100 years that our economy has changed quite a bit.